Hey everyone, welcome to Enabling Digital with Systems Plus. I'm Amay, your host today, and I have some great guests in the office with us today. We have Eric Gordon, who is a operating partner for Mid-Ocean Partners, which is a private equity firm. And we have Shawn Sherman, who is the VP of IT for Smith System, which is a portfolio company of Mid-Ocean. So I'm really excited to get into really the dynamic between sort of your lens, Eric, and how you're an operating partner and how you look at sort of IT strategically and as an EBITDA driver across portfolio companies. And then, of course, yours, Shawn, more from the perspective of, okay, you're running or living this day to day and how some of the strategies you've sort of helped implement at Smith since you've joined. So Eric, I wanted to start with you. What are some of the core technology challenges that you see across sort of portfolio companies today?
So first of all, Amay, it's great to be here today with you and with you too, Shawn. I think the first thing is we need to realize what private equity investors want to see. So, and in most cases, they've probably paid a firm or someone to do due diligence on companies, but in its essence, a growth equity investor wants to create differentiated value. That's the end of the day. So some components that they look at and some things they're very concerned about out of the gate are, number one, that the tech is stable and secure. And that includes cybersecurity, it includes disaster recovery, business continuity topics. Second is the portfolio company's got to have the data to be able to deliver insights. And that means a couple of different things. It means, can they close their books accurately? Can they produce financials accurately? But can they have the right metrics to share with the sponsor firm to be able to dig into the whys behind certain questions and business trends and things like that? Third is the ability to scale. Typically, this involves both organic and inorganic growth, but a lot of times growth equity will involve buying a core foundation platform company and then adding acquisitions to that. In that case, the technology has got to be modern and scalable. And in many cases, legacy tech isn't. And then finally, the tech must be agile enough to support future business changes. So there is a value creation plan. There's an idea as to what the end state vision and operating model of the company needs to be, and the tech's got to be able to adapt to be able to support that. So you asked about challenges, and there are some common challenges that we really see across sectors and across different businesses. Number one is legacy tech. Legacy tech that's not just potentially end of life, but it could be poorly configured. Could be inflexible and can't scale. The second thing is poor data hygiene. A lot of times companies will be addicted to spreadsheet-based processes. We call that spreadsheet hell mode, and they're extracting data out of their ERP system into spreadsheets, and they have one or two individuals in the finance department that are good at munging the data and coming back with some insights. The third thing we see, or the fourth thing we see a lot is small IT teams. Typically, these are teams that are constrained both by skill and capacity, and they try to wear too many hats. And what we always say is, if you're trying to do everything, you're going to be good at nothing. And so we typically will see that. We also see poor operating model discipline. So many companies out of founder-led, or maybe one or two turns out of founder-led, just don't have great operating processes and good discipline. And all of these things combined add a lot of friction to achieving the value creation plan.
So what you said was very interesting. There are some strategic things the portfolio companies have to do to grow their value and improve as a business, especially if if you're going to acquire other businesses, grow organically, inorganically, adapt to change, like you said. But teams are small, right? And so that's an investment if you want to expand the team, but a strategic investment. But at the same time, from a private equity perspective, EBITDA expansion is also very important. So how do you sort of balance the urgent, more EBITDA-driven issues for an expansion versus, okay, hey, this is a strategic investment that we need to make to grow the business?
Well, in the growth equity space, we're trying to create something new, not just put a coat of paint on a rusty asset. And there are a lot of firms that make a great living buying a business and streamlining the cost structure and not really doing inorganic growth, but just kind of getting a little organic growth, and then if you don't get a multiple reward for that, but you can exit it at a more valuable company. That's not growth equity. In growth equity, the strategic issues are less about cost cutting, and they're just more about finding and activating those elements that can create differentiated value. But that's hard to do if the technology can't support your end state vision. So strategically, a modernized tech stack is critical to that, and those always cost more than the 10-year-old legacy system that was supported by two guys for the past 10 years that are internal employees, and that's all they did. So it really involves finding the right talent to support not only the modernization efforts, but also the change to the business efforts and technology becoming a real partner along with the change plan. Tactically, I would say the high interest rate environment that we've been in for a while is probably going to persist. That adds a lot of cost. It makes it a lot more expensive to add in service leverage. And then just the fundamental trade-off is portfolio companies that are struggling with cost and margin and just flat out EBITDA levels. It's a big distraction from making strategic change and transforming the business.
So I appreciate the perspective, Eric, and I want to kind of now move to Shawn. Now you're living this sort of day in and day out as the VP of IT for Smith. Modernization, you got to improve the business, but you also need to operate the day-to-day sort of tech stack. I know you guys have had a bunch of legacy platforms and a bunch of modernization happening. How do you balance sort of all of that?
Yeah, when I joined Smith, the company had grown substantially through acquisition, so we inherited multiple technology stacks. The development teams, the operational models that were involved with that. So the immediate challenge wasn't just the modernization, it was the stabilization of making sure that everything is running, the do no harm scenario. So really we went in and we separated everything out into 3 tracks. The first one is to run the business, right? Make sure, again, you're keeping systems running, you're not doing any kind of harm, you got to keep it stable for all your customers, right? The last thing you want to do is start dropping off on one entity to go and do something with another. You have to rationalize the stack. You have to reduce the duplicate systems, the architecture. You have to think what's needed, what's not needed, right? And then you build out your future platform. So in our case, a learning management system, a modern LMS that consolidates multiple companies into one is kind of that third track within there. So there are some trade-offs whenever you're doing that. We deliberately deferred certain modernization activities and initiatives. They were interesting, but they didn't really move the business forward initially, right? Mm-hmm. So we put a pause on that, and we focused on decisions that reduce the operational complexity first. Bring it down, look at it, adjust accordingly, and then you can really start to move on innovation.
So Shawn, some of the things that Eric mentioned around maybe smaller IT teams and engineering capacity, or the ability to integrate inorganically, especially right by adding on acquisitions into Smith, how have those sort of reflected in your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, one of the biggest realities is integration complexity. And at Smith System, we brought together several companies in the fleet safety and driver training space, and each had their own unique systems, architectures, operating processes. So a big part of my job is turning that collection of platforms into a coherent technology ecosystem. Another area that shows up is engineering capacity versus demand. So as the business grows, the expectation for product development, data insights, customer capabilities, et cetera, grow with it. The internal team is often, balancing keeping the existing systems running, all the while building the next generation of products. So ultimately, the goal is to move from a collection of inherited systems to a unified platform that supports the entire Smith system.
So Shawn, one of the important things is while modernizing is also to do it in a sort of cost-efficient manner. Could you share a decision that you had made that really materially impacted sort of cost or margin?
Yeah, it's actually a decision that rolled into many decisions that came from it. But one example that had a real impact for us involved how we leveraged Systems Plus through a captive engineering model to accelerate the decision making without slowing down our internal teams. So at Smith System, we've grown through acquisitions, like I said, and one of those companies has been acquired before I joined. We had several that had, and it had not been fully operationally integrated into the broader Smith technology environment. When we started evaluating it, we realized there were a lot of interconnected systems and business processes underneath that platform. Right, some were valuable, some were outdated, some simply didn't fit into our long-term architecture. So the challenge was that our internal engineering teams are already focused on running the business and building our next generation learning platform. Obviously a lot tied to that, right? So if we pulled them off those initiatives to do a deep technical discovery effort, would have completely slowed down all of our critical product work. So instead we deployed parallel analysis team through your Systems Plus captive model. And that team performed a full technical and operational assessment of the environment. What made this valuable was it acted basically as a force multiplier of sorts to our organization. So our internal teams continued executing their roadmap while Systems Plus built a comprehensive picture of that environment. So the output wasn't just documentation, it was a structured set of recommendations around which systems should be integrated first, which processes were worth preserving, which components should be replaced entirely. So, those insights influenced our engineering roadmap and our IT integration decisions, right? And in several areas helped us avoid investing in systems that ultimately didn't belong in the long-term architecture at all. So the real impact was truly twofold. We accelerated our understanding of the acquisition without disrupting ongoing development, and we made smarter architectural decisions that saved both time and money. So, for a mid-market company that's integrating multiple acquisitions, that kind of parallel capability and speed of insight is extremely valuable.
Awesome. And one of the things you mentioned as you're sort of integrating multiple companies together is you're also building a next generation learning management platform. And to do that requires talent. You mentioned the captive model. How does the talent strategy break down in your head when you're thinking through these modernization efforts, the stabilization efforts, and so on?
Well, the biggest challenge, in my opinion, for mid-market companies isn't access to ideas. It's access to scalable engineering capacity. There are typically three issues at hand here. One is capacity constraints. So our internal teams are often very strong, but they're small, and they end up spending too much time maintaining existing systems instead of building out new capabilities. Talent competition. Competing with large tech companies for every engineering role, it's just not realistic for most mid-market organizations. And a lack of scalable delivery models. So many companies try to solve the problem by simply hiring more people locally, but the approach doesn't scale efficiently, and scaling is everything. So the most effective models that I've seen, kind of combine a couple pieces of it. It's strong internal product and architectural leadership, but globally distributed engineering teams that can scale. So the combination allows companies to innovate faster without sacrificing that quality or that control.
So, Eric, what Shawn mentioned is a globally distributed engineering team, and we know Smith has a very solid team in India today through what we call the virtual captive or managed GCC model. GCCs in India in general are becoming more popular. But from a PE operating perspective, how do you explain the value of, say, the insourcing or the virtual captive or the GCC model versus the more traditional outsourcing that people are used to?
So that's a great question, Amai. Traditional outsourcing, let's be very clear, it's an extremely valuable model and can solve a variety of technology tasks, and it's part of what most people think about when they think about offshoring or outsourcing. But you have to look at the talent model employed, and you have to remember that in many larger organizations, team members can be more focused on their own success than really dedicated and committed to your success. So you often end up working with the least experienced people in the organization, because the good ones get moved on. The good ones get promoted, they get moved to other accounts and things like that. And so the additional thing is traditional offshoring models aren't typically as adaptable to nuanced customer needs. They tend to be a little bit more rigid and scalable in their approaches. Contrast that with a GCC or Global Capability Center. It can offer all the above solution capabilities, but it gives you control over the technology talent and how that talent's employed. It's dedicated to you, and that stability and dedication allows it to be more cost effective. Typically it's lower turnover, and it can also adapt more quickly, and team members are invested in your success because they feel they're part of the client organization. So if you need agility, if you need experienced talent, you need some dedication, the GCC model is almost impossible to beat.
So Eric, one of the things you mentioned was the GCC model does make a lot of sense, and you're seeing a lot of the evolution of that. I know setting up a GCC in India is a process, and I know what Smith is leveraging is a little different in the managed GCC model. What are you seeing as more effective, especially for mid-market firms which don't need the scale of 500 people, but probably something much smaller than that, sometimes 10, sometimes 50, sometimes 100?
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. I mean, setting up a traditional owned and company operated global capability center takes some scale, and it takes, let's say 500 seats worth of people and a lot of overhead and a management team and real estate and things like that. The startup process takes a long time. But what Systems Plus has done, and how Smith has really leveraged that effectively, is that they're basically a top-tier GCC operator that is operating continuously a number of client GCCs on a managed basis. So adding another client to that mix is just adding another repetition of the talent acquisition and financials and getting things up and running. It's very, very quick. You can get a new client spun up as quickly as a month or two, and it's just a lot easier to do. And that's the benefit that Smith has received, and that's why it's important for mid-market companies, because it scales downward. It scales and can be highly effective for teams of 10, maybe even less, but it can also scale up to hundreds. So it has turned out to be a very, very interesting business model and very effective for mid-market companies.
And Shawn, when you were evaluating this model, what were your non-negotiables?
For me, I have three true non-negotiables. First is the talent continuity. Right? The engineers working on our platform need to develop that deep knowledge of the product and the architecture. Stability, long-term continuity, absolutely critical. Another is integration with the internal teams, right? We have internal teams, they're going to have to integrate into them, but the best global engineering teams, they can operate within that same process, right? They can meet, they can merge in with what we're doing, and we learn from them, they learn from us, but you have a sense of continuity. So same sprint cycles, same DevOps, your pipelines, engineering culture, et cetera, right? So integration, merging in. That'll make the model successful right there. And then alignment with your business outcomes, right? This really is driven from product. Engineering teams should measured on that product impact. So things like delivery, quality, innovation, not just the operational metrics. So adhering to all of those is key.
So Eric, this GCC model, clearly has been very effective. How can PE firms turn this into a more repeatable playbook?
Well, that's a great question, Amai. I think first you have to start and think about, within a private equity firm, the first step is really educating the partners and the deal teams and the operating groups on where and when we want to use the GCC model. Private equity firms operate a couple of different ways. Some are very prescriptive and put very defined playbooks into portfolio companies without a lot of input from the portfolio companies. So it's a little more of a prescriptive approach. Other private equity firms allow a lot more latitude with their portfolio companies to make their own decisions. So you got to decide where that balance needs to be. And with the GCC, the beauty of it is it's got a lot of flexibility. So an example would be a private equity firm could acquire a portfolio company and like Smith and realize it needs the scale of some engineering talent, so therefore it can support and would benefit from its own GCC setup. Another example of how it could effectively be used is the private equity firm could say something like, business intelligence and analytics and data is so important for us. We're going to set up a GCC team dedicated to analytics and data warehousing and data governance, and we're going to have all of our portfolio companies, or we're going to have a handful of our portfolio companies share those resources and let them operate across the different portfolio companies. Makes it more cost effective for each one. So there's a variety of ways this can be effective, from dedicated like Smith to maybe a shared services type of model. And again, given the fact that we started up quickly and can really begin to add value almost within the first month or two, makes it just a really important tool.
And Shawn, what are some of the governance or integration pitfalls that you've seen as you've been going through this process?
Well, one of the easiest things to get wrong is a lack of governance clarity. Specifically around who owns what, who's on first, right? And when you introduce a shared or captive delivery model across multiple companies, it works best when there's a very clear separation between the strategic ownership and the execution capacity. So in our model, the portfolio company, we own the product, direction, and the architectural decisions, right? That can shift. We can shift that over, but that's the way our model is built out. The engineering teams, specifically, regardless of where they sit, they execute against the roadmap as part of that same delivery process, right? So there's kind of a clear delineation. We have exactly, we know where that leadership, role is, we know where the execution is based, and we can share between them. Where things get complicated is when the boundaries aren't defined early on. If architectural ownership, the product prioritization, or delivery governance isn't clearly established, teams, they start pulling in different directions, right? And you get a lot of a lack of continuity, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. It starts going off the rails, snowballs in a very negative way. Another area that's important is the prioritization discipline, right? So in a portfolio environment, we have several companies in there, and they could be competing for engineering capacity. So you need a strong governance around how those initiatives are evaluated and sequenced and prioritized.
So Eric, from my experience in working with private equity firms in the past, what I've typically seen is they don't look at technology as a strategic EBITDA driver, aside from maybe a big implementation that could cost a bunch of money, or a modernization effort at times, but those are sort of more point-in-time efforts. From your perspective, how does the technology strategy actually influence the EBITDA in the private equity world?
Well, so first of all, that is, the role of technology in mid-market is changing dramatically. Almost everyone now realizes the value of technology and how, especially in growth equity, how technology can add differentiated value to a portfolio company. Okay, so technology is increasingly becoming embedded in the partnering and the development of theses, of value creation planning, typically now getting embedded in portfolio company onboarding, 30, 60, 90-day planning processes. Because if an acquired portfolio company, if we do our diligence correctly, we're going to have a good understanding of where their gaps in cybersecurity and risk are. We're going to have a good understanding of the agility and the scalability of their core operating platforms. And so we'll always go into a deal with an idea that says we'll either need to do an ERP upgrade or implementation or not, or strengthen cyber in these particular ways. We'll build that into the plan. So I think what's happening is technology's moving forward in the whole deal cycle and process. It's becoming part of portfolio company onboarding and technology direction setting early enough, so that the most important thing is we get the change done early in the hold period. Okay, the worst situation we can be in is 3 years into a hold period and then suddenly figuring out that what we have is adding friction to the business, and then we need to start an ERP project and it's 18 months or so, and now we're in 3.5, 4 years into the hold period. We've just done an ERP and we're not really then able to only then leverage the value of something like that.
And when you're looking at these companies from a technology perspective, what are some of the KPIs that you look at to ensure that the technology initiatives and decisions being made are creating value?
Well, I think that there's a number of things here, but on the cost side, it's things like tech spend as a percentage of revenue. It's tough to benchmark that across different industries, but within an industry, you can develop a pretty good idea as to where you should be or where you could be. Unit cost metrics like rates, blended rates, cost per employee, time to market for product changes, and things like that are things that we look at. On the business side, it becomes a little bit more strategic. It becomes a little more process focused. Things like AI automation and adoption. How many processes are we leveraging some of these new technologies in? How are we expanding our curated data set in our data warehouse? Are we just limited to sales and inventory type transactional data, or are there some interesting third-party industry data we can combine and begin to gain a lot deeper insights? And finally, I would say a really good metric that we track is the number of spreadsheet-based manual processes. We inventory those, especially if we're doing an ERP, and then we just go down that checklist and we say, look, if there's 15 or 20 of those going on today, then if we at the end of this ERP implementation, if we've got more than 3 or 4, then we haven't done enough work.
Spreadsheet-based manual processes. I really like that one. And that's, I think that's an incredible signal. Of course, there are other signals, Shawn, that you're looking at today. What are some of those that really indicate, okay, Smith is a mature company and potentially ready for a future exit?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure, my view is different than Eric's view on that side a little bit. We have some things in common that we're definitely going to be all looking for. Buyers want confidence that the technology foundation can scale with the business, right? That's a no-brainer. It's a non-starter if they don't. There's many indicators that will lead you that direction, but there's a few I think that are really important to point out. First is a unified platform architecture. And again, these are near and dear to my heart here. Investors want to see a coherent system architecture. It's got to be able to support growth rather than just a patchwork of disconnected systems. That is an absolute nightmare. No one wants to deal with it. So that's first and foremost. Predictable engineering delivery, right? Your teams had to be able to consistently deliver product innovations and improvements without relying on some kind of heroic effort to go do it, right? It's got to be a consistently driven effort that is producible, it's measurable, and it's significant. A mature security and compliance posture. That's, again, absolute non-starter without, right? Things like SOC compliance, strong identity management, clear governance structures, that signals an operational, mature organization, right? And then you can't leave out the data-driven capabilities. When companies can turn operational data into insights for customers, it significantly increases the strategic value of that platform. So those four are 4 big ones for me.
I would add another one also, that if what we're building is a platform company that's capable of additional add-on inorganic growth, and that's how we're going to sell or position this company to the next buyer, we have to have demonstrated acquisition integration skills and expertise, and the company's got to have demonstrated that change agility, so that we can position that company out there and says, hey, the market is ripe. There may be 5 or 6 more acquisitions, and we've demonstrated that's a repeatable playbook for us.
Awesome. I really appreciate both the insights, Eric and Shawn, and I want to bring this back as we sort of close out the episode. So we've spoken about various initiatives, some longer, some shorter. From your perspective, for the both of you, what does a 90, 180, 365-day tech transformation plan look like at the time of acquiring a company?
Well, I'd say number 1, remove the technology friction points quickly, early in the process. I would say number 2, include technology direction setting and strategy elements as part of the value creation plan to ensure that we've got alignment. And I would say, finally, build a stable foundation before you accelerate and pursue additional growth. Get that done right, and then hit the gas pedal.
Yeah, as Shawn mentioned, stabilization first. I like that. Yeah, so we'll keep that one in mind. Shawn?
Yeah, I've got a lot of the same here, but slightly different order, which is interesting. My first 90 days are about that stabilization and the visibility. Understanding what the technology landscape looks like, doing an assessment of it, getting it stable, keeping it running. Too many times you'll acquire an organization and you'll lose sight of the current ones that are sitting underneath it that are running, right, that need to stay running. So stabilization and visibility first, foremost, me, first 90 days. The next half year is about rationalization, right? It's going through how do we simplify things, how do we consolidate processes, tool sets, workflows, systems, et cetera, right? So consolidating it, making it simpler. And then, once you get to that 1 year mark, now you're turning around, you're shifting to scale. Now you're starting to grow. So stabilize it, rationalize it, consolidate it, bring it down, simplify it, get it down, and then grow, go.
Awesome. So real quick, lightning round, quick answers. Eric, I'll go to you first. What are some of the biggest technology mistakes leaders make in PE or operated companies today?
Not investing in modernization, then questioning why IT is adding friction to the business.
Shawn, what are your thoughts on that?
Treating technology purely as a cost center instead of the capability that drives the growth and the stability and the differentiation.
All right, what is one metric you would like to move in year one?
I have to give you two. Building the foundation quickly, but then also leveraging technology in the commercial sales and go-to-market area. Automating and modernizing the sales and sales pipeline is critical to growth. That takes time.
Shawn?
Shifting your engineering capacity to that spend more towards innovation versus maintenance, right? Getting out of the maintenance cycle is tough, but once you need to get over it, you need to innovate, you need to drive, you need to move forward. So engineering capacity.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they literally said 50% of the engineering capacity is spent on just day-to-day operational tasks, and the remaining 50% is only then available to innovate, which is, is insane. And last question, Eric, what is one mindset shift that leaders need to make today about technology?
Deal teams need to have a point of view around how they're going to use data creatively and how they're going to leverage AI in the investment memo as they go to the investment committee.
Shawn?
When you think of technology as a platform asset, you build scalable architecture, data capabilities. Those investments, they compound, right? And they compound across the business. They ultimately increase that value.
Amazing. Well, that's all I had. Thanks, Eric and Shawn, for your time today.
Great, thank you.